A woman just walked outside in minus 47 degrees Celsius to feed her dogs. Not sled dogs kept for sport, working animals. The difference between reaching the next community and dying in the bush. She has been doing this every morning for 30 years. She does not own a car. The nearest road is 400 kilometers away. And when I asked her if she had ever considered leaving, she looked at me the way people look at a question that genuinely does not compute. This is Canada, not the Canada in the tourism brochures, the other one, the second largest country on Earth by land area, 10 million square kilometers, and the majority of it, the vast, staggering, incomprehensible majority of it, is empty. Not empty in the way that deserts are empty. Empty in the way that geological time is empty. Boreal forests stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific in a continuous band that represents the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. Tundra above that, extending to coastlines where the Arctic Ocean freezes solid for 8 months of the year. Mountain ranges that have never had a permanent human settlement within 100 kilometers. Rivers so large they would qualify as major waterways on any other continent, flowing through landscapes where no road will ever be built because no economic justification exists to build one. In this video, I am going to take you into that Canada, the one that begins where the last road ends, from communities accessible only by ice road, highways that exist for 10 weeks a year, built on frozen lakes and rivers, and disappear entirely when spring arrives, to families who have chosen to live entirely outside the grid in the subarctic wilderness, generating their own power, growing what they can, hunting what they cannot grow, to Indigenous nations whose relationship with this landscape goes back 12,000 years and who hold knowledge about surviving in it that no survival manual has ever fully captured. But I need to tell you 3 things I found in Canada's north that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. A highway that only exists in winter, and that trucks use to supply entire communities with everything they need to survive for the following year in a window of 10 weeks before the ice melts and the road disappears. A family living 200 kilometers from the nearest neighbor who has not bought food from a grocery store in 11 years. And a phenomenon that occurs in the sky above the northern wilderness that physicists can describe mathematically, but that no mathematical description has ever adequately prepared anyone to witness. 3 impossibilities. 10 million square kilometers. Let's begin. The country that begins where the map ends. Before we go anywhere, I need to give you a number that reframes everything. 90%. That is the proportion of Canada's population that lives within 160 kilometers of the United States border. The entire southern fringe of a country that extends 4,000 kilometers northward from that border, which means that 90% of the land area of the second largest country on Earth is occupied by approximately 10% of its population. And that 10%, the people who live in the north, in the boreal, in the tundra, in the remote communities and isolated homesteads and off-grid properties that exist beyond the reach of paved roads and reliable electricity and same-day delivery, live in a relationship with their landscape that the other 90% of Canadians experience only in photographs. The North is not simply a geographical designation in Canada, it is a psychological reality. Every Canadian, regardless of where they live, carries some awareness of what exists above them. The bush, the barrens, the shield. Names that carry weight. Names that mean something different than their literal definitions. To understand Canada, to actually understand it, rather than simply visiting its cities and its mountain parks and its coasts, you have to go to where the road ends, and then keep going. The highway that melts. In northwestern Ontario, in the territory of the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, there are 31 First Nations communities that have no permanent road connection to the rest of Canada. None. Year-round, they are accessible only by air, except for approximately 10 weeks every winter, when the lakes and rivers freeze hard enough to support the weight of transport trucks. The Winter Road, a network of ice roads, some years more than 2,000 kilometers of them, built by crews who test ice thickness daily, who know that 15 centimeters of clear ice will support a snowmobile, that 30 centimeters will support a light truck, and that the minimum for a loaded transport truck is generally considered to be 1 meter of solid ice. They know this the way tradespeople know their materials, from experience, from the feel of it, from reading ice the way other people read text. For those 10 weeks, trucks run 24 hours a day across these ice roads, carrying everything that 31 communities will need for the following year. Lumber, fuel, medical supplies, food, building materials, everything that cannot be flown in, which means everything heavy, everything bulky, everything cheap enough to be worth living without for the months when only air access is available but expensive enough by air to make waiting for the ice road economically necessary. And then spring arrives, and the ice softens, and the road disappears, back into the lakes and rivers it was built on, as if it was never there. The communities that depend on winter roads do not experience climate change as a policy debate or an economic calculation. They experience it as a shortening window, as ice that used to be reliable in November being reliable in January, as roads that used to run 12 weeks running 8, as the margin between enough supplies and not enough supplies growing narrower every year. In some years, the ice never gets thick enough. The road never opens, and everything that was meant to come in on the ice must either be flown in at costs that are 3 to 5 times higher per kilogram than surface transport, or waited for until the following winter. This is Canada's infrastructure reality in the north, not a historical condition or a temporary situation. The present, right now, today, the family that left. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. In 2012, a family from British Columbia drove north until the road ended. Then they took a boat, and then they walked. They have not left since. Their property, if property is the right word for a piece of boreal wilderness to which they hold legal title, but over which the wilderness exercises far more authority than any legal document, sits 200 kilometers from the nearest permanent settlement in the subboreal interior of British Columbia. Elevation approximately 1,100 meters. Average winter temperature in the -20s. Snowpack by November, persisting until April or May depending on the year. They built their cabin from timber they felled themselves, using a chainsaw mill to cut boards from the logs. They generate electricity from a combination of solar panels and a micro-hydro system they built on a stream that runs through the property. Their water comes from that same stream, filtered through a gravity-fed system they designed and installed without outside assistance. They grow a garden in the brief, intense summer. A garden designed around the roughly 90 frost-free days the altitude and latitude provide. They preserve everything. They hunt moose and deer in the fall, processing the animals themselves and storing the meat in a root cellar cut into the permafrost. They fish year-round, through ice in winter, in the open river and lakes in summer. In 11 years, they have bought no food from a grocery store. I want you to hold that sentence for a moment. Not as a survival stunt, not as a social media project, as a deliberately chosen way of life, sustained across more than a decade by a family that made a calculation about what they wanted their lives to contain, and then built the skills to make that calculation survivable. Their children were born in the cabin. They are homeschooled. They can identify every edible and medicinal plant within a 5-kilometer radius of the property. They can read animal tracks in snow with a precision that wildlife biologists who have spent decades in the field describe as exceptional. They know the watershed around their home, every tributary, every beaver dam, every seasonal change in water level, the way city children know the layout of their neighborhood. These children are growing up inside a landscape rather than adjacent to it, and the knowledge they are accumulating, practical, embodied, local, is the kind that cannot be taught in a classroom because it does not exist in any curriculum. The 12,000-year conversation. At 30% of this journey, I need to tell you something that changes the frame entirely. The wilderness we have been moving through, the boreal forest, the tundra, the frozen lakes, the river systems, is not uninhabited. It has never been uninhabited. The idea that this is empty land, frontier land, wilderness waiting to be discovered, is a European idea that arrived approximately 500 years ago and has been causing damage ever since. Indigenous peoples have been living in, managing, and holding detailed knowledge about every region of what is now Canada for at least 12,000 years. In some areas, the archaeological evidence suggests continuous habitation for considerably longer. The Dene Nation, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Inuit, the Métis, each with distinct languages, distinct territories, distinct relationships to specific landscapes, relationships built on 12,000 years of observation, adaptation, and accumulated ecological knowledge. The Cree of the James Bay region, for example, hold knowledge about the migration patterns of the George River caribou herd, a herd that has ranged between several hundred thousand and over 800,000 animals across its cycles. That spans generations of observation. They can describe fluctuations in the herd's behavior, timing, and route that precede written records by centuries. This knowledge is not stored in documents, it is stored in people, in families, in the oral traditions that carry specific, practical, verifiable information about how this landscape works. Information that wildlife biologists have spent decades attempting to document and that Indigenous knowledge holders have maintained continuously for 12,000 years. When the Canadian government and resource companies have made decisions about northern development without consulting that knowledge, which has happened repeatedly, the results have consistently been worse than they would have been with it. Not slightly worse. Significantly, measurably, documentably worse. The wilderness we are moving through is not empty. It is full of knowledge that the dominant culture has systematically failed to recognize as knowledge. And that failure has costs that the North continues to pay. The coldest places people choose. In the Yukon territory, where the boreal forest transitions to subarctic scrub and the mountain ranges of the St. Elias and Mackenzie systems define the horizon in every direction, there are communities that experience winter temperatures below -50 degrees Celsius with sufficient regularity that local residents have developed the kind of relationship with extreme cold that people in temperate climates develop with minor inconvenience. At -40, exposed skin freezes in approximately 10 minutes. Vehicles that are not plugged into block heaters overnight will not start in the morning. Breath freezes on contact with the air. Metal becomes brittle. Plastic shatters. Diesel fuel gels. At -50, the physics of the everyday world begins to produce effects that feel theatrical. Throwing a cup of boiling water into the air produces an instant cloud of ice crystals. The water never reaches the ground in liquid form. Frost forms on the inside of windows, despite triple glazing. Trees snap in the night with sounds like rifle shots as the sap freezes and expands. People in Dawson City, Yukon, a community of approximately 1,300 people at the confluence of the Yukon and Klondike Rivers at latitude 64 degrees north, experience this regularly, and they have adapted to it with a thoroughness that goes beyond clothing and shelter into something closer to a philosophical reorientation toward cold. They do not fight the cold, they accommodate it. They dress in layers so precisely calibrated to activity level and temperature that the system becomes second nature, adding or removing a layer the way people in warmer climates might adjust a thermostat. They heat their homes with wood, which requires cutting and splitting and stacking cords of firewood in summer, a calculation of future warmth performed in present effort. They park vehicles with the engine running when they need to leave them outside for more than an hour. They carry fire-starting material at all times in the wilderness. And in February, when the darkness and cold are at their most extreme, Dawson City holds a winter carnival, not reluctantly, with genuine enthusiasm, because the alternative, treating winter as something to be endured rather than inhabited, does not work in a place where winter constitutes 8 months of the year. The light that has no adequate description. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. I mentioned a phenomenon in the sky above the northern wilderness that no mathematical description has adequately prepared anyone to witness. The aurora borealis, the northern lights. I am going to attempt a description knowing that it will fall short. Because every description falls short, because this is one of those experiences that exists in a category where language was not designed to operate. It begins as a faint green glow on the northern horizon. Easily mistaken for distant light pollution if you have not seen it before. Then it strengthens. The glow develops structure, a band, then multiple bands, then shapes that the human pattern recognition system immediately attempts to categorize as curtains, as rivers, as living things, because the aurora moves. It does not simply illuminate the sky, it flows through it. Waves of light pulse from the horizon toward the zenith. Curtains of green fold and ripple, as if disturbed by a wind that exists somewhere above the atmosphere. Then, on the nights when the solar activity is strong enough, the colors shift, from green to purple at the margins, to red at the highest reaches, to white at the most intense concentrations, and occasionally, on the nights that people who have spent lifetimes in the north remember specifically and describe carefully as if afraid of overstating, to a full sky display where every direction overhead is active simultaneously, where the aurora moves in all directions at once, where the silence of the northern night and the complete impossibility of what is happening above you produce something that the most secular person present will reach for religious language to describe. The physics are understood. Solar wind, charged particles ejected by the sun, interacts with Earth's magnetosphere and is funneled toward the poles. When those particles collide with atmospheric gases, the gases emit light. Oxygen emits green and red. Nitrogen emits blue and purple. The altitude and density of the collision determines the color and structure. The physics are understood. The experience remains irreducible. Lying on your back on the snow in the boreal forest of northern Saskatchewan or the Yukon, in silence so complete that you can hear the aurora, some people report a faint crackling or hissing sound that scientists have confirmed is real, though its mechanism is still debated, watching the sky conduct itself like something alive. This is one of the things that Canada's north contains that exists nowhere else on Earth with the same intensity, the same accessibility, the same regularity. The boreal forest and what lives in it. The boreal forest of Canada, also called the taiga, is the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. It covers approximately 552 million hectares. It stores more carbon than any other ecosystem type on the planet. It filters more fresh water than any other forest system on Earth. It provides habitat for an estimated 3 billion birds during breeding season, roughly 30% of all North American bird populations. And most of the world has never heard the word boreal. The boreal is dominated by spruce, fir, pine, and larch, coniferous trees adapted to the short growing season and thin soils of the northern latitudes. In some areas, the forest is open enough to walk through comfortably. In others, particularly in the black spruce muskegs of the lowland areas, it is so dense and the ground so saturated that movement is a matter of hours per kilometer. every step either solid or sinking into peat that has been accumulating for thousands of years. The animals that live in the boreal are adapted to an environment defined by extremes. The moose, largest member of the deer family, capable of reaching 700 kilograms, wades chest-deep in boreal lakes in summer to feed on aquatic vegetation and to escape the black flies and mosquitoes that make the warmer months an exercise in biological harassment. In winter, it stands motionless in spruce thickets for hours, conserving energy, its metabolism slowed to a rate that would indicate illness in any domestic animal. The woodland caribou, distinct from the barren ground caribou of the tundra, lives its entire life within the boreal forest, following routes established over centuries between seasonal feeding areas. Caribou are functionally designed for snow. Their hooves are broad and concave, acting as snowshoes and shovels simultaneously. The front edge cuts through ice and crust. The hollow center scoops away snow to expose the lichen beneath. Their legs lose almost no heat to the environment because the blood flowing to and from their extremities runs in paired vessels, arterial and venous blood warming each other before the cold blood can drop the core temperature. The wolf follows the caribou, has followed it for 10,000 years. The relationship between predator and prey in the boreal is not simply ecological, it is ancient, mutual. The wolf culls the caribou herd of the weak and the sick, maintaining a population that is on average healthier than it would be without predation. The caribou, through its movements and its grazing, shapes the vegetation that defines the wolf's hunting terrain. This is not metaphor, this is ecology. But standing in the boreal, in the tracks of both species, in the silence between them, the distinction between ecology and something more profound becomes difficult to maintain. The people of the ice. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. Above the tree line, where the boreal gives way to tundra and the tundra gives way to the Arctic coast, the Inuit have lived for approximately 4,000 years, in conditions that the human body was not obviously designed to survive. The Central Arctic, permanent permafrost, winter darkness lasting from November to January when the sun does not rise above the horizon, winter temperatures that average below -30 and regularly reach -50 or below with wind chill, sea ice that extends hundreds of kilometers from shore, moving, fracturing, pressure ridging, a surface that is simultaneously the Inuits' highway, their hunting ground, and one of the most dangerous terrains on Earth. The Inuit technological response to these conditions is one of the most sophisticated examples of applied engineering in human history. The igloo, not simply a pile of snow blocks, a precisely engineered structure built from snow cut in specific dimensions and arranged in a spiral that angles progressively inward as it rises. The physics of a core-built arch, executed in a material that most engineers would consider structurally inadequate, producing an interior that can maintain temperatures 30 degrees warmer than the outside air, using only body heat as the energy source. The kajak, the kayak, a watercraft so precisely fitted to its individual paddler that it functions as an extension of the body rather than a vessel distinct from it. The spray skirt seals the paddler into the cockpit, allowing the entire craft to be rolled upright after capsize. The Eskimo roll that modern kayakers practice in heated swimming pools originated as a survival necessity in Arctic waters, where a capsize without recovery meant death in minutes. The Inuksuk, stone figures built at specific points across the tundra, each one encoding information about navigation, hunting grounds, and safe travel routes in its shape and position. A pre-literate information system built into the landscape itself, readable by those who knew the code, invisible in its meaning to those who did not. These technologies were not primitive adaptations to a difficult environment. They were elegant solutions to specific problems, developed through iterative refinement over centuries of living and dying in a landscape that punished error immediately and absolutely. The Mackenzie and the rivers that run north. The Mackenzie River is the longest river in Canada and the second longest in North America, after the Mississippi-Missouri system. It runs 1,738 kilometers from Great Slave Lake to the Mackenzie Delta on the Beaufort Sea, including its tributaries, the Peace, the Athabasca, the Liard, the South Nahanni. The Mackenzie system drains approximately 1.8 million square kilometers of northwestern Canada. It runs north, almost entirely north, through boreal forest and muskeg and subarctic scrub, and eventually the flat river-braided landscape of the Mackenzie Delta, one of the largest river deltas in the world, a maze of channels and lakes and islands that covers approximately 13,000 square kilometers and provides critical habitat for dozens of species of migratory birds. The South Nahanni River, a major tributary of the Mackenzie, flows through the Nahanni National Park Reserve, one of Canada's first UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Its centerpiece is Virginia Falls, a waterfall nearly double the height of Niagara Falls, in a canyon so remote that it was not surveyed until the 20th century, and that is still accessible only by floatplane or multi-week river journey. The Nahanni has a history. Gold prospectors entered its canyon in the early 20th century and did not come out. Bodies were found, sometimes decapitated, in circumstances that investigators could not explain. The river acquired a reputation. The Headless Valley, the Valley of the Vanished. Local Dean people had their own understanding of the canyon, a place of power, of danger, of forces that the European prospectors were not equipped to navigate. The prosaic explanation involves hypothermia, accident, wild animals, and the fundamental hostility of a remote wilderness to unprepared travelers. But standing at the lip of Virginia Falls, watching the Nahanni drop 96 meters into the canyon below in a thunder of white water that you can feel in your chest from 100 meters away, the Dean interpretation of this place as something more than a geographical feature feels less like superstition and more like an accurate reading of a reality that ordinary language struggles to contain. The last great migration. Every spring, across the tundra of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, one of the largest migrations of large mammals remaining on Earth takes place. The Beverly and Commonirjiwak caribou herds, part of the broader barren ground caribou population, move northward from their winter ranges in the boreal to their calving grounds on the Arctic tundra. Hundreds of thousands of animals, moving in streams that can stretch to the horizon in every direction, crossing rivers, traversing mountain passes, navigating terrain that changes every year as the snowpack shifts and the vegetation responds to year-to-year variations in temperature and precipitation. From the air, which is the only way to see the full scale of it, the migration looks like the landscape is moving, like the tundra itself is flowing northward. The individual animals are indistinguishable from altitude. What you see is a pattern, a river of brown moving across white and gray, a biological process operating at a scale that makes the human presence in this landscape feel exactly as small as it actually is. The indigenous communities of the Central Arctic have followed and hunted these herds for thousands of years. Their knowledge of the migration routes, which valleys the animals use, which river crossings they favor, which years the timing shifts and why, is encoded in oral traditions that span generations of observation. That knowledge is now being documented in partnership with wildlife biologists who have spent careers studying the same herds using GPS collars, aerial surveys, and population modeling. What the collaboration reveals consistently is that the traditional knowledge is accurate, that the patterns the Dean and Inuit elders describe match the data the biologists collect, that 12,000 years of observation produces reliable ecological information, Information that is now more urgent than ever as the caribou herds face pressure from climate change, industrial development, and the disruption of migratory routes. The choice. Quick pause. I recently started this channel to take you to the world's most extraordinary and hidden places. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscriber really matters. If this kind of content helps you understand the world better, consider subscribing. It helps me keep exploring and bring you even more breathtaking destinations and make even better videos. Thanks. Now let's keep traveling together. I want to return to the woman I mentioned at the beginning, the one who walks outside in -47 to feed her dogs every morning, who has not driven a car in 30 years, who lives 400 kilometers from the nearest road. I asked her, eventually, what she misses about the world she left. She thought about it for a long time, long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she said, the variety of food in grocery stores. That is the honest answer, the variety of food. And then she said, but I do not miss the noise. I do not miss the speed. I do not miss the feeling that everything requires my attention immediately and that my attention is never adequate. Here, she said, attention is a different thing. You pay attention to the ice, to the wind, to the animals, to the weather building on the horizon. Your attention has consequences. It is not divided among 100 competing demands. It goes where it needs to go, and the results of paying it correctly are immediate and real. That is what living off the grid in the Canadian North provides that nothing else provides. Not simplicity. This life is not simple, not peace. The North is not peaceful in any conventional sense of the word. Consequence. Actions that have direct, visible, immediate results. A life in which the connection between what you do and what happens is not mediated by systems so complex and distant that the connection has become invisible. That is what she chose. That is what the family in the sub-boreal interior chose. That is what the Dean elders who continue to travel the land by snowshoe in their 70s choose. Every day, in -47. With dogs that need feeding before the sun, if there is a sun, has cleared the horizon. The return. 10 million square kilometers. After everything we have moved through in this journey, the ice roads that disappear in spring, the family that grows and hunts everything they eat, the Inuit engineering in snow and skin, the caribou migration visible from the air as the landscape moving, the aurora conducting itself above the boreal in colors that the English language was not built to describe, the rivers running north to a coast that freezes solid for 8 months. That number still does not feel adequate. Canada's north is not simply a geographical fact. It is a counter-argument. A counter-argument to the idea that the modern world has resolved the question of how human beings should live. A counter-argument to the idea that comfort and connection and convenience are the highest values available to a human life. The people who live in the north of Canada, Indigenous and settler by birth and by choice, are not living in the past. They are living in a present that most of the modern world has forgotten is possible. A present in which the landscape is not a background to human activity, but the primary reality, and human activity is something that occurs within it, on its terms, at its pace. That is not a romantic idea. It is a hard one. It requires skill and knowledge and physical capacity and a tolerance for conditions that the body was not obviously designed to endure. But it also produces something. Something that the woman with the dogs knew when she answered my question. Something that the family in the sub-boreal interior is raising their children to understand. Something that the Inuit engineers who built the igloo and the kajak understood with a completeness that modern engineering, for all its sophistication, has not surpassed. That you can live anywhere, if you know how, if you pay attention, if you are willing to let the landscape teach you what it knows. But here is what I have not shown you yet. There are communities in Canada's north, small, isolated, connected to the land in ways that go far beyond what we have seen in this video, where people are doing something that the rest of the world is only beginning to understand. Rebuilding, recovering languages that were suppressed, recovering knowledge that was deliberately disrupted, reconnecting with landscapes that were disconnected from their peoples by a century of colonial policy. In the next video, we go in search of other communities, and what they are building, quietly, without much attention from the South, will change how you understand what recovery actually looks like. Tell me in the comments which moment in this video stayed with you longest, because for me, it is still the woman and the dogs, and the answer about the food. Stay with us, because the next journey goes somewhere the map has never fully captured. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, share it with someone who needs to see this, and if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do.